From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm John Cole. I'm the director of the library's Center for the Book, which is its reading promotion arm. And we're very pleased to have you here for a Books and Beyond talk, which is one of the ways that the Center for the Book helps promote books and reading, in addition to having affiliated centers around the country and playing a major role in the National Book Festival, which is going to be September 24th this year. We also do programming here at the Library of Congress at noon, and we feature authors of new books that have a particular association with the Library of Congress. In this case, not only has our speaker written and illustrated books, which of course are in the Library of Congress, but she has a special relationship with the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Gallery, which is a new promotion partner of the Center for the Book. This is the first in a series of talks that we hope to have that are by artists, about art, and it gives us another dimension for our program. Today's talk, as are all of our talks, is being videotaped for the Library of Congress's website, and for that reason I ask you to please turn off all things electronic. We are going to have an opportunity towards the end for some questions and answers, and I hope that you participate, but I also must tell you that by choosing to participate, you're also giving the library permission to be part of our webcast, perhaps. We are very pleased that this is the beginning, as I said, of a series. And to introduce our speaker, it's my pleasure to present Erica Clark. Erica is Associate Director for Program Partnerships at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Gallery. She is a longtime comrade of Richard Koldacek. Richard is here, who is the director of the Hirshhorn. Richard, would you stand? There you are. We're very pleased to have the partnership underway. And to introduce our speaker, Erica Clark. Erica?
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, and thank you to everyone for being here today. Before I introduce Myra, I'd also like to thank Dr. Billington, the librarian of the Library of Congress, with whom Richard Koshalik and I visited recently, and really who is the impetus for this collaboration. But another word about collaborations and why the Hirshhorn. The Hirshhorn is a museum of contemporary art, and we like to think of it as a museum of contemporary art and culture, dealing with contemporary life, not just art on the walls, but really the society and the world that we live in, particularly here with our location in Washington and on the National Mall. So with enough of that plug, but thank you so much for being here today with us. What could be more perfect than to begin this collaboration here at the Library of Congress, a temple of wisdom, a temple of knowledge, with a book that represents an utterly individual and unique tribute to America in all its glories and foibles, and a tribute to democracy itself as we know it today. And moreover, a book with a beautiful illustration of the Library of Congress itself on pages 22 and 23. Has anyone here not read a book by Myra Kalman? Is this a first introduction? Oh, fantastic. You are in for a treat. This is the latest of a series of books that Myra has done, which began with books that were ostensibly for children about Max going to Hollywood, Max the dog, that is, going to Hollywood, and then moving on to a series that she did for the New York Times. I'm sorry, before that, an illustrated version of The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which is a wonderful new take on that. I encourage you to get that. And prior to this, a blog. I know she doesn't care for that word, and actually I don't either, but an online installment in the New York Times called The Principles of Uncertainty, which became a book shortly before this one, which was also in the Times. There's no more fitting backdrop than the library in which to present And the Pursuit of Happiness and Myra Kalman, for this is also a book about knowledge, personal knowledge, public knowledge, shared knowledge, and the knowledge that is accessible to all of us precisely because our democracy enables us to have a library like the one we're sitting in. And I would also add, it also enables us to have the internet on which Myra first created And the Pursuit of Happiness, and an open internet, for better or worse. What, you might ask, on picking up And the Pursuit of Happiness could chapter titles like So Moved, or I Lift My Lamp Beside the Golden Door, or Time Wastes Too Fast have to do with democracy or happiness? And as a partial answer, I'd say that by chance, as chance had it, I finished reading And the Pursuit of Happiness just as I set the table for Thanksgiving this last week, and the timing suddenly seemed apt, because I think all the chapters in And the Pursuit of Happiness are, in addition to ruminations on a wide-ranging group of topics about America and about democracy, also in a way about giving thanks. Thanks for the invention of democracy, and for its implementation by our forefathers, and for not taking this for granted. Thanks for being part of a country which, despite its intense and complex history and current problems and flaws, is still a wondrously open place to live. It's a continuing beacon to the world, as Myra's parents themselves must have thought when they emigrated here in the 1950s, when they came to New York. It's a book about thanks for the astonishing variety of experiences and cultures and backgrounds that surround us, right here, in this building, everywhere in Washington, everywhere we go in America today. Again, it's something entirely present in Myra's life as well, from the moment she arrived in New York as a child, and it's evident in the marvelous depictions of the people that she encounters in And the Pursuit of Happiness. And perhaps above all, And the Pursuit of Happiness is a book of thanks and celebration for the wonder of everyday life in this incredibly vibrant and energetic place we call home, which is America past and present. For like all great writers, Myra also does one thing best, and it's something that gives this book its unique combination of gravitas and joy and hope. And for you who are new readers to her books, you'll discover this very uncanny combination, and I think it's what draws so many people here today as well. It's to observe closely and to take the seemingly everyday and ordinary and make it sing with the particular, whether it's a hat, Myra is famous for her hats, or a chair, or a piece of pie. So on page 22, for example, of this book, this is a portrait. It's not just a picture of a chair, it's a portrait of a chair. It's a particular chair. We know this chair after looking at it with its books. Or on the back cover, this is one hell of a piece of cherry pie. And it's the one that came to Myra because history does indeed make you hungry. And she'll, I'm sure, describe where she saw it. And at the same time, it's the perfect emblem of a book about America, cherry pie, Washington. So in just a few words and pictures, an entire essence is created, and the subject, whether it's pie or a chair or a hat, is bathed in a kind of radiance. These pages are radiant. Who else, for example, would create a portrait of the tram operator, at the Capitol building, sporting a jaunty hat? Here she is. Gorgeous. This is about a wonderful respect for everything and everyone observed as well, and especially children. This is a book about the pursuit of happiness through the bounty of children, beautifully depicted throughout the book, sometimes in photographs which say probably more to Myra than even the drawings themselves. Look at this glorious portrait of a boy, perhaps preparing Thanksgiving dinner in a kitchen with flowers. Glorious. And of course, history and observation go hand in hand with humor as well. And throughout And the Pursuit of Happiness and all of Myra's prior books, the way the pages look with the glowing color and the instantly recognizable handwriting, they become funny and somehow poignant and moving at the same time. They're handmade. Who else, for example, would choose to note that George Washington had a dog named Sweet Lips? Instantly, we have a new take on our founding father. And who else would think, as Myra does on pages 36 to 37, of illustrating her breakfast, a classic American breakfast, with the caption, "I paid with a Lincoln and 2 Washingtons." So that's an entire governing, culinary, and fiscal system distilled into one image and 8 words. Or who else would describe a curtain tassel with a literary joke, as Myra does, and by the way, it's a tassel at the Library of Congress, no less, with the idea of calling it a stately plump tassel. That's something that would have made both James Joyce and Buck Mulligan smile. And of course, Myra herself says this all best. On page 281, she writes, "Think small is my new motto. It helps me handle the complicated too muchness of it all." In the too muchness of it all, we and the world we make for ourselves together are the accumulation of countless specific and general details. Our life histories, for example, like Myra's on the back cover of this book, are everything from first piano lessons to gigantic world-changing shared events, like the one that she puts, the Kennedy assassination. So in concluding, let me propose that rather than calling And the Pursuit of Happiness a graphic novel or a picture book or an album, as some have done, this is more accurately a 21st century illuminated manuscript. You could call it the Très Riche Heure de Myra Kalman, a book that illuminates moments in the life all around us in new detail and gives us new eyes for the very special place and time we're in, reminding us of the knowledge and perhaps even the happiness that's ours for the looking and recognizing. So here we are, Myra says at the end of her cover bio, and here with immense pleasure and gratitude is Myra Kalman.
Completely a pleasure to be here, though. I actually would prefer not to be talking, but to continue the walk with John Cole through the rare book rooms and through the Great Hall, because you never want to leave, and it's the most extraordinary place to be. I can't imagine coming here to work every day. It must be exhilarating, except for maybe the politics of other people here, but that's probably another thing. But so thank you, Erica. That was really it's always nice to hear good things about yourself as opposed to she's an idiot. But I say that my family came from Tel Aviv in 1954, and I always say that if you want to come to America, 1954 is the perfect time to come here. And it was, so I think that's my advice to anybody who's coming here, come in 1954. Because we came from Israel. We weren't fleeing then. My parents had come from, there's a history of fleeing, but that was something else. My parents left Poland, Russia in the 30s, and they came to Palestine. And my father joined the underground, and then he became a diamond dealer, and then we came to America in 1954. And we were kind of middle class or lower middle class, and buying books was not part of the vocabulary at all. We never, ever bought a book. But my mother, so I'm bringing you to the point of my whole life, which is the influence my mother had on me, which was we went to the library, and we started from A and we went through Z. And the memories for me of being in those rooms with those huge windows and the light streaming through and the polished floors and the wooden chairs where you're sitting there going off in a dream world in this reverie of exploration is something that is so intense with me now. And I think that was the beginning of wanting to be a writer. And that's what I thought I was going to do. Until I grew up and I thought my writing was atrocious, and I thought, well, I could draw. How hard can that be? So and then the good news is that I always say that my sister's an artist, so how hard could that be? But because she's not here now, so I can say that. But so the essence of telling a story in narrative, of using words and pictures, for me is essential. And I go back and forth between those two elements all day long. I get up in the morning and I have coffee and I read the obits, and then I walk around, and then I just collect stuff and trudge through things, trying to make sense out of, try to make sense and nonsense out of things. So I'm going to show you, so speaking of my mother and the importance of my mother, I'm going to show you something. So now you really have to be able to see these screens. This is a map that my mother made of the United States of America. And there are many amusing things about this map. And this appeared in the previous book, The Principles of Uncertainty. I've been asking people to make maps of the United States from memory. Just sit down and do it. And nobody can do it because it's an impossible country to remember. I mean, who remembers, where is Idaho? You know, who knows? But, so my mother sat down and did this, and she wasn't trying to be funny or Steinberg. So you see Texas and California are nestled under Canada. Alaska is underneath New Hampshire, where California might be. Hawaii is underneath North Carolina, which is underneath South Carolina. So, and it goes that Lenin, the village that she came from in Russia, Lenin is in there, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And through the center, in a bold swath, is sorry, the rest unknown, thank you, which basically, for my mother, means sorry, the rest unknown, you can go to hell. And the reason that she's saying that, not because she was an aggressive woman by any means, she was really quite quiet, but also quite mad, and wonderfully mad, was that rules had no place in our home. There was no reverence for information. We never spoke, nobody knew anything, and it was great. We had no reality quotient, and I mean that, there are times when that's not such a great thing, but there was never a sense that you were obliged to know how to do things the right way. And growing up with somebody like that is an extraordinary situation because she had great humor and great irreverence and great love of art and music and all the obligatory lessons of music and ballet and all that. But she never expected you to do things the right way, and that is a very powerful thing. And continued doing that and let me make my own mistakes. Which brings me, so the way that I approach the work I do is from that point of view. It's very intimate. I don't want to get it right. I just want to get it. And getting it, for me, means many different things. And it changes all the time, of course. So working for the New York Times, the first column, the first pieces that I did online were called The Principles of Uncertainty, really about the vulnerability and fragility and inescapable essence of confusion and sadness that permeates life. I think that everything that I do is funny and sad combined, and I can't imagine any of those two things not being part of the story. So the first one was about my life and ruminating about my life, and then the conversation was, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, we don't know either, and that was great. A handshake later, and that was a great point of view. The point of view of not knowing, and the point of view of saying, I don't have the information that many people might have about many things. I have my own story to tell you, and that there was a place for that in the New York Times, which was really fantastic. So The Pursuit of Happiness came about 2 years later when the conversation again was, well, what are we going to do now? And the answer was, nobody know. Again, I didn't know, except that Obama had been elected. And the conversation was, well, what is the thing that I know least about, care least about, and never want to hear the word? Politics for me is like, don't even bring that word up in front of me because I get nauseous. So we decided that's what I would do. I would be sent on assignment for a year, and I would get nauseous for a year, and tell the story from the point of view of somebody who never cared and never liked the whole subject. And what happened was I fell in love. I fell in love with the country in a way that I never had, and I fell in love with with every single person in the country, which is a big job. So I'm going to read a few columns, and then I can digress or I can go quickly, and we can have more time to talk or not. But the first column, I was sent to the inauguration, and just, of course, it seems a lifetime ago what the mood was of that time. But that, to me, was the beginning of my journey to see what America was like. So it begins, Hallelujah. Hallelujah, the angels are singing on this glorious day. And we mortals, driving down to Washington, passing white mountains and black mountains of unidentified industrial stuff, listen to Lorraine Hunt Lieberson sing words from a Bach cantata. Now is the time of grace. And the heart is racing, and all I can say is hallelujah. Hallelujah for the Walt Whitman rest stop in the New Jersey Turnpike, where the plastic flowers in the women's restroom look quite noble. And what's interesting about that, well, there are many things that are interesting. One, it was a wonderful moment to photograph these flowers and to paint them. But I returned there about a year later, running into the restroom to see which flowers were there, and they didn't have any. And I spoke to the manager, and she said, budget cuts. I said, where did they go? And she said, budget cuts. And I said, how much does it take to take care of these flowers? And she said, no, people steal them, and we couldn't replace them. So there was a sad moment in history, but I don't want to dwell on that. Hallelujah for arriving in Washington and feeling the excitement and happiness in the air, for the hats in the Baptist church, at the Martin Luther King Day service, and the choir singing We Shall Overcome, for the small French paintings show at the National Gallery and the Antoine Vallon painting of a mound of butter with not one but 2 eggs, and for the guard with the perfect red eyebrows guarding the paintings. For Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, changing the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of property to the pursuit of happiness, and for the shoes of the man portraying Jefferson at the Museum of American History who spoke so confidently, confidence. And while we are at it, hallelujah for the Fortuny tea gown also on display in the museum, which is a total knockout. Hallelujah for knowledge and for the honor of language and ideas and books. For Jefferson's glorious library full of Cicero and Spinoza and Aeschylus and Thomas More and books on bees and trees and harpsichords all intact in the Library of Congress. And for the stately rare books reading room in the library, and for the stately plump tassel hanging on the rich crimson curtain near the people who work and study there. And I have to stop here and say thank you to Mark Dimunation, who was so gracious to bring me into these rooms and to, well, allow me into a little bit of heaven. That was a great moment, and allowed me to hold this book. And for the small, worn velvet Bible housed in the rare books reading room that Lincoln used for his inauguration and Obama used for his inauguration. Hallelujah for being allowed to hold that Bible in my hands. Abraham Lincoln, Myra, Barack Hussein Obama. Nice. And a woman named Renata asked, why on the Bible? Why not on the Constitution? This was at a party later, and I was telling about the Bible. She said, why not on the Constitution? And I think that is a very good question. But now we are taking a short break from questioning. Right now we are opting for naivete. Hallelujah for the vast sea of nearly 2 million people holding madly fluttering flags in the bright noonday sun, for being smart again and sexy again and optimistic again. For the helicopter roaring up from behind the Capitol next to the Japanese pagoda tree, a dot in the sky. Hallelujah for the hope of a new world. That was Bush leaving. And the roar of that moment outdid the whole roar of the inauguration. That was really an extraordinary thing to see. And the Japanese pagoda tree, oblivious to all the fuss, vaguely remembers that it is also known as the Chinese scholar tree, which flowers profusely in late summer, offering to the lucky person standing under it a fragrant, dappled refuge from the noonday sun. So that was my first moment of, oh my God, this is really some kind of a, amazing situation. And the conversation that we had was, where would I go next? What would I do? We made a list, my editors, David Shipley and Mary Duenwald, about where I might go. And I wanted access to places where I wouldn't normally go, an army base in the South, and Fort Campbell in Kentucky, the Pentagon, where I could see secrets and such. The thing I got to see was a 3-hole punch, which I did a painting of, and that was the extent of. But it punches secret papers, and I thought I touched the punch that punches the papers that have the secrets, and I don't know. Anyway, so can do well. So this is Ben. So I'll give you a few little bits of different things. This is Ben Franklin, looking a little bit. I said a tad haughty, but he had a right to, because. If he was the kind of guy that if he saw somebody sick, he started the hospital system, and if he saw a house on fire, he started the fire department, and if he saw somebody reading a book, he said, hey, well, let's have a library, a lending library. So he did a bunch of stuff. So he's but for me, the most important thing that I have in the book is the chart that he made of his life, the daily chart. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know what your charts look like, but his says the morning question: what good shall I do today? This day, and the evening question, what good have I done today? And I think that's so not like my chart at all, but one of the things that I decided to do, and in terms of thinking small, going through you really could go insane when you're dealing with such complexity on so many levels. So the thing that you have to, there's a kind of shutting down process, which means thinking small. And so what I've decided to do is to volunteer to sweep in Central Park, which I decided that's my gesture of something that I like to do. I love to sweep and clean, but now I can do it for New York. So if you go to Central Park, you'll see that it's quite spiffy. And talking about the nature of this country, what humor is in this country, and what inventiveness, and what wonderful spirit of amazingness, and also people take naps. That you can have a sense of humor about your work in the sense that you can be completely rigorous, of course, but you can also say, now it's time for a nap. And Edison took naps every day, as did Winston Churchill, of course. And Winston Churchill famously took naps he said, no half measures, take off all your clothes. Well, take off all your clothes, get into bed, and then when you get up again, you have another full day. So, I mean, he was saving the world in the morning, and then he was saving the world at night, so he deserved a little bit of a nap. But I think the most poignant, the most poignant piece in the book for me was a piece about Thomas Jefferson. And I spent time in Monticello visiting his home. And when you go to Monticello, of course, when you go to the home of any of the people that you're writing about, and it's sad that Ben Franklin doesn't have a home to visit. You're looking at the crazy wallpaper that Mary Todd Lincoln chose for their bedroom, and you think, of course she was insane. I mean, it is psychedelic. But of course, if you go to Monticello, then you really are encountering the genius of this country in a way that it's unavoidable. And so I'll talk a little bit, about this, and maybe I won't read the whole thing. I don't know. We'll see. But. So the piece is called Time Wastes Too Fast. I would like to tell you everything about the silence around the pyramids of Giza, about the crazy, rubbery, long-beaked echidna, about why being in Le Corbusier's Ronchamp Chapel is a religious experience, about the Katsura Imperial Villa outside Kyoto and drinking pomegranatinis with my friends Mr. Aharoni and Mr. Noe. And I would tell you all this because he was a Renaissance man and would have been fascinated by all of these things, more than most people. But there is no time. But if you want to understand this country and its people and what it means to be optimistic and complex and tragic and wrong and courageous, you need to go to his home in Virginia, Monticello. And imagine you are invited. I was. And of course, I've been talking about this since this book has come out, but I developed this insane crush on Abraham Lincoln, and unrequited love across the centuries. And imagine that he would have made the best boyfriend on earth, and eventually husband. But so I imagine myself being invited to Monticello, and there I am. So, I'm taking photographs of things and sketching in my book, and then when I come back to my studio, I can assemble all the story and I can paint. But this is a little page from my sketchbook. Thomas Jefferson was a scientist, philosopher, statesman, architect, musician, naturalist, zoologist, botanist, farmer, bibliophile, inventor, wine connoisseur, mathematician, and he was governor of Virginia, Secretary of State, Minister to the court of Louis XVI, Vice President and then President of the United States, initiator of the Louisiana Purchase and its exploration by Lewis and Clark. And you walk into the Palladian house that he designed and redesigned with the triple sash windows that he invented. And you immediately appreciate the breadth of his curiosity. What else? He vehemently believed in separation of church and state. He founded the University of Virginia, one of the first non-religious colleges in the country. Oh, there are a few more little things. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was 33, and on July 4th, 1776, the Founding Fathers adopted it. A revolution was underway. So there, you have this somewhere in the building. He was tall and lean and slept partly sitting up in an alcove bed that divided his study and dressing room. He woke at dawn. I don't think he took naps. He did have migraines, but he studied Hessian flies and Voltaire and maps of Africa and the Quran and Shakespeare. And it just went on and on and on. And of course he wrote to Adams, I cannot live without books. And so we have that legacy today. His rooms were covered with paintings. The most important people were on the top. He revered three men, Francis Bacon of the Jaunty Topper, Isaac Newton of the luxurious locks, and John Locke of the luxurious nose. And he also made charts of everything. He was an obsessive person, and this is a chart, well, you can't see that, but this is a chart of all the vegetables, the fruits and vegetables, and when they're coming out in the market, he wanted to know, well, what's the season, and what are we going to make from it, and just an incredible amount of information that he was extraordinarily interested in, and his favorite vegetable was peas. And so now I'm going to have a pop-up store where I sell cans of peas, and I don't know if I can call them Thomas Jefferson peas, but I prefer mushy peas from England, but just because of the name, not because I like the mushy peas. But we'll see. But it's very nice that I feel a kinship with him about peas, and I don't know where that'll lead us. In Paris, he was a well-dressed man. Later, clothes mattered less. His jacket was patched, and socks were sewn into the lining for warmth. And again, if you go to Monticello, I don't know if they're going to take out his jacket for you to hold, but I probably not. But there is something, there's that moment for me, the moment of connecting with an object, and which is why I paint objects so much in the book. Because if you're walking around in your life and you come upon a chair or come upon a rubber band or a jacket, and you don't have some kind of jolt of excitement and sense of exhilaration, then that's a shame, because these are the things that populate your life, and these are the things that you're relating to all day long. So they're powerful things, these things that are around us. He was friends with James, little Jimmy Madison, who helped write the Constitution, by the way, and Dolly Madison, who was gregarious and charming and often served as Jefferson's hostess. And this is actually from a photo that she lived long enough to be photographed, and so this is the only photograph of Dolly Madison, the painting of that. The Marquis de Lafayette, who helped finance the American Revolution and did not get his head chopped off during the French Revolution, would come by and visit, and he probably ate Dolly's ice cream. Jefferson and he would stroll in the garden and pluck Marseille figs from the trees. And while they strolled and ate the delicious figs, they would pass the slave quarters. The man who wrote the Declaration of Independence and said of slavery, "This abomination must have an end," was the owner of several hundred slaves. The monumental man had monumental flaws. And barely 30 years after his death, on July 4th, 1826, the Civil War exploded. And what about his relationship with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves? And it is believed that she gave birth to 6 of his children. And which makes, and not only that, but Jefferson's father-in-law is thought to have had a liaison with the mother of Sally Hemings, which makes her his wife's half-sister, which is incredible. His friend, the Polish freedom fighter, Kosciuszko, left money in his will to be given to Jefferson to free and educate his slaves. But the task was overwhelming, and he did not get it done. Archaeologists are sifting through every grain of soil at Monticello to learn the story of what their lives were like, master and slaves. Here is a Wedgwood creamware fruit bowl they found. Imagine the elegant evenings of brilliant discourse and fine wine and the best of everything, Thomas playing the violin, Martha playing the pianoforte. Alongside that, evenings of endless labor and deprivation and freezing in pitifully small rooms, each one of which housed an entire family. Jefferson was a kinder master than most, and he was greatly conflicted. And this is a miserable part of the story, but it is not the whole story. This is a page from the farm book where they show which the names of the slaves and what kind of provisions they were given during the year. How much food, how much clothing, the the bedding. He had terrible migraines and took to his bed for days at a time. He gave excellent advice to his daughter Patsy. Determined never to be idle. No person will have occasion to complain of the want of time who never loses any. It is wonderful how much may be done if we are always doing. And I think I left that note on my children's plate every morning at breakfast, just as like, have a lovely day, but don't forget this. So they're workaholics, that's okay. I stood in his garden pavilion and imagined him looking down the valley or up at his house. It is extraordinary that the building is still there. And to his friends, the object of walking is to relax the mind. You should therefore not permit yourself even to think while you walk, but divert yourself by the objects surrounding you. Walking is the best possible exercise. And it's interesting. I talk a lot about walking and about what happens to you when you walk and you stop thinking. You really shouldn't think. When you walk and you observe what's going on around you, and when you walk and you forget the things that are concerning you and the problems that you have. So let's all go for a walk after this. And then, of course, the crazy irony that after he died, he left his family insanely in debt, and everything had to be sold, and it was bought by a Jewish admiral, Admiral Levy. And I imagined going to, his son Jeff Levy's bar mitzvah. I thought, of course I was there. But so they saved Monticello. I don't know, somebody else may have, and then by the by, he designed interiors for his friends' homes just because he had a little spare time. And I talk about history making you hungry, which is a sub-theme of the book. I think that there are more pies and cakes in this history book than in any. I'm sure that there are more pies and cakes in this book than in any other history book that exists. And again, I document the meals that I ate. I document the fried chicken and corn on the cob in the Supreme Court. Because again, those moments of celebratory moments are really important, and they could happen when you least expect them. Having a cupcake in the Museum of Natural History, and I was thinking about Freud, who wrote that America was a gigantic mistake, which is another part of this book, because he probably had a stale cupcake after, and he did have a lot of stomach problems, so he was really in a bad mood when he was here, but. And he also had come over on the George Washington, the ship, the ocean liner, with Jung, and they were fighting the whole way because they hated each other's guts. So anyway, so food plays a really important part in people's lives, and I think it's a nice thing to document. Well, later, as we strolled back to the house, the little leaf lindens released a pungent perfume. Jefferson's life was epic, but a tiny moment captures the heart. When Martha Jefferson lay dying at the age of 34, after 10 years of marriage and giving birth to 6 children, the desolate Thomas Jefferson never left her side. They copied out their favorite passage in the novel Tristram Shandy, first in her hand and then in his. Time wastes too fast. Every letter I trace tells me with what rapidity life follows my pen. The days and hours of it are flying over our heads like clouds of a windy day, never to return. More everything presses on. And every time I kiss thy hand to bid adieu, every absence which follows it, are preludes to that eternal separation which we are shortly to make. And that's the end of that, which is not happy. And then I finish the book talking about happiness. And George Washington and happiness. My mother looked an awful lot like George Washington. I don't have a photo of her here, but some people who are interviewing me say, did your mother try to look like George Washington on purpose? And I think, well, that would be completely insane. But she happened to have a passing resemblance to him. And also she was very honest and couldn't tell a lie, so. Not that the couldn't tell a lie story is true, of course. Anyway, he suffered terribly from his teeth. He lost all his teeth. He ended up with one sad tooth. And he wore these really horrible dentures, which are wood and hippopotamus tusk and wire springs that are in his mouth. And they were too big for him. And you can see now when you notice photographs of Washington that he always has this swollen mouth because the teeth, they could never get the teeth right. And he did, of course, he didn't cut down the cherry tree, but this is a pie. Actually, this cherry pie was a pie that I ate at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and had it with some of the people that were about to go to Afghanistan and Iraq. So it was an important pie moment and life moment. I end the book with talking about happiness because, of course, that's the question. What's the whole thing? What's the whole happiness thing about? And you could think about that forever, but you shouldn't, of course. The last thing you can do is you can't go after happiness. You have to do the things that bring you happiness, and that's a very subtle twist that you learn when you're a little bit older. But it was raining in New York. The trees were wet and black, and people walked up Fifth Avenue. Where is happiness? What is happiness? What did Thomas Jefferson mean, the pursuit of happiness? And I visited Dr. James Watson of Watson and Crick, and I thought, okay, now I'm going to find out something. And the reason that I went to visit him is that he was on the Charlie Rose show and was talking about when Charlie Rose asked him, what's the next frontier? And he said psychology, which was an extraordinary thing for him to say. He wants to understand why people are not happy. So I called him up and I said, well, I'm going to come over and ask you a few questions. And he was very gracious, and he did. And he said, Come on over. I learned nothing, of course, and that's the moral of the moral of the story is, of course, you learn nothing by going to ask somebody what's the secret to life or what's the secret to happiness. But he did tell me that he said, you have to work with people that you have to do the work you like, you have to be with people that you like, you have to do some kind of exercise in your life and move, and he takes 50,000 milligrams of vitamin D every week, which is a huge amount of vitamin D. But in the New York Times today, I don't know if anybody of you saw it, completely. So it's kind of hilarious because you have to say, everything is subject to being nothing. So what are you going to do? So what do I do for my happiness besides wander around in a confused and dazed state? I go to the museums and I look at Velázquez's Infanta. And I look at a woman in a red dress with a snappy hairdo looking at the Infanta. And later I see her going home in her fur-collared coat, not the Infanta, but the woman. And a present arrives. It is a book by Vladimir Nabokov, who is no longer alive. And then I spend a little bit of time thinking about the people in my life. Well, I also think about the Marquis de Lafayette. He wasn't in my life. But about people who are both in my life and who are no longer here. And then I say, you can't dwell on that for too long because that's not going to bring you to any kind of happiness. So what do? I clean my house. And I think that's an important thing as an artist. What I find is at the counterpoint of doing something that's very concrete, very real, like washing the dishes or cleaning the house, is something that is so joyous. I think I'm going to, well, I don't think, I know I'm going to go get a job in a castle and work as a domestic for a while, just to be able to do paintings of the working rooms. But also because I like that counterpoint of putting things in order. I mean, it's the same thing as sweeping in Central Park. I take napkin folding classes, which are pretty boring, actually. And I make plans for trips to gardens where I will sit and draw and knead a meringue and savor the moment. By George, that's it, savor the moment, which is, of course, and keep calm and carry on. Those are two things that you should always, if you have those two things in your mind, you'll be all set, and that's it. Should I get off? No, I should stay here. You didn't see. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has questions or not. We can say not and leave it at that.
So, when you're doing the lettering within a word, is there a conscious decision when to capitalize?
An editor's nightmare. You know what was interesting about that? The question is, within a word of my handwritten words, is there a decision when to capitalize and when not? And of course, when I send in my manuscript to the New York Times, and it's copy edited very seriously, of course, and then I get it back and ignore everything. And then it was an interesting conversation where we could say, they said, never mind her, just let her, you don't have to copy edit it. You can copy edit it, but for spelling, of course. So I move in a semi-conscious, I mean, I know very well what I'm doing, but I'm not deciding other than what I feel is needed. So feeling, I guess, is guiding me, and some aesthetic decision. But it goes very quickly, it's not labored. Yes?
What other artists do you follow now, or were you inspired by in the past?
Well, there are many artists. Clearly, Matisse is a big influence on me, and Saul Steinberg. I would say that those two, Saul Steinberg in the contemporary world, and I think when I was beginning to draw, he was a really profound influence. And then Ludwig Bemelmans is an incredible influence on me because of his work for children and adults, traveling, making his life that kind of travelogue, and not having a distinction between the art that he does for children and the art that he does for adults. And that was really important to me too, that the audience is the same. You may have a certain slant of some things, like there's a Lincoln children. There's a book for children about Lincoln that came out of the Lincoln column for this book, but it's very much the same, except a few other things for kids. So Bemelmans was very important. Charlotte Solomon, who was an incredible painter who died by the hands of the Nazis in her 20s, used gouache and wrote about her family, paintings and writing also on the paintings. So she is somebody that's very important to me. And for less obvious but equally important, Duchamp and Eva Hesse, for just kind of conceptually going a different way, if you can. I guess that Nabokov would be the person that I hold in greatest admiration of our from 20th century writers. But Sebald I adore. Robert Walser is somebody who is lesser known, but there's a growing appreciation of his work. He was a Swiss writer who, I've done a painting of him lying dead in the snow, so I have a particular weak spot for him. But because he spent the last 25 years of his life in a mental institution, but that's not why. I mean, though you could say that there's a you'd say that you feel a kind of kinship, because if you say, oh my God, I'm going to end up in a mental institution in a minute, and you think, oh look, well he was there, but he wasn't having fun, so it's not about having fun in the mental institution. But I'm hoping to get a job in the mental institution that he was in Switzerland. Anyway, so that's to answer. Jane Austen. Many writers, many writers. Yes?
Your illustrations always seem so instinctively tied to your writing. Do you usually write first and then illustrate, or vice versa?
I write and paint kind of back and forth like a ping pong thing. And sometimes I see something that I know clearly I'm going to want to paint, like the three-hole punch, or many things. Or an image of somebody sitting in a chair, or the tassel in the rare book room. And I know I'm going to write to that. And then there are other things where I'm actually writing and thinking, writing. So it's fluid. It goes back and forth. Yes?
I really enjoyed your material on Jefferson in particular. Is he someone or a person that you write and think about a lot, or was it mostly that you arrived at the notion of happiness first and those words for you to include?
Well, the question is, I think the question is, was Jefferson was somebody that I was thinking that was Jefferson's concept of happiness informing, making me think about it, or was it something that I was thinking about before? No.
My question was, do you write and think, or you
I never think. Yeah. Well, it all is a big mess. I didn't know anything about Jefferson, of course. I'd been to Monticello many years ago. So again, when I'm approaching anything that I do, I'm approaching it from a reasonably, an adult who's reasonably intelligent, but a naive point of view. So thinking about happiness, of course, and I remember I would say this when I was a teenager, I just want to be happy, and my mother would say, well, what's happiness? And at first I didn't understand how she could be so callous about her answer. But in fact, it was really a brilliant answer. So, what is the answer to that? But in the defining of things that you do work, you're occupied with work. You're occupied by something in your life that gives you a sense of satisfaction, no matter what that is. You're engaged with some number of people who you can, who don't drive you nuts most of the time. Well, I don't know if I've answered your question, but no, that was the moral. That's the lesson I learned from the other book, from the Principles of Uncertainty. That the thing that I learned is everybody gets on everybody's nerves, and until I understood that, I was always feeling so bad about getting on other people's nerves, and I thought, well, just that's how it is. Yeah.
I enjoyed seeing your collection in the cruise show that's happening around the country right now. Your collection of uneven is a lot. And I was just wondering what you think the importance of the collection in your work is.
I'll say that there's a retrospective of my work that's going around like a virus. It's going around the country now. It's in L.A. It's coming to New York to the Jewish Museum in March, and it's 100 drawings which were curated, which was curated by Ingrid Schaffner at the Institute for Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. And I did an installation in the center of the room. So 100 paintings ring the room, and in the installation of what I collect, which are buckets and ladders, suitcases, moss, and other things which were in my room. So my room is a lot emptier now. I'm happy to say, a little distressed to think what will happen when it comes back. But I collect things that, again, as artifacts of moments that I find exhilarating and just like kind of electric moments. I don't know how else to put it, that I see something and I go, this is an incredible thing, and it makes me think about a story, and it makes me laugh, and it makes me wonder what I would do with it. And the satisfaction that I have that I can paint this object is an extra bonus of life, that I can go into my studio and listen to music and then go into the land of where you're painting is a really extraordinary thing. So the collections aren't valuable in any level, and I could probably get rid of them tomorrow, except for some of the ladders that I love very much. But it's a changing kaleidoscope. It's like, as I say, it's like being an archaeologist, where you're just looking at the things that are around you and saying, and the moments of falling in love. I have some really nice projects that I'm working on now. One of them is a children's book about Thomas Jefferson. The Lincoln book is finished, and a book about Thomas Jefferson, which I'll begin based on this column. And I'm going to do an illustrated version of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas by Miss Stein, Crazy Great Birds, and a few other things that are funny. Yes?
How was working with Lemony Snicket on your wonderful picture book, 13 words?
13 words. Well, this picture book that just came out, 13 Words, Lemony Snicket is somebody who I've known for a while, and we're working together on a young adult book. Actually, I should say, it's like that I'm painting as we speak. Well, I wish I were, no, I'm not, I don't wish I were painting as we speak, but I'm painting. So working with him is fantastic. I've known him for some years, and that's the pen name, for those of you who don't know, of this brilliant and hilarious and eccentric man named Daniel Handler. So he writes for adults under the name Daniel Handler, and he writes for children under the name Lemony Snicket. So fun is the answer. Fun and work. Fun and work. Yes.
It seems like there's a lot of paintings in this bucket as well as all of the others, and it seems like from when you started, if you began at the inauguration, it's not that long away now. How much do you produce every day? It just feels like such a volume. There's so much work to do.
Right, I know, it's sickening. It's really nice to have a deadline. I say that the motivator for me, I'm an illustrator, and I like to think of myself as an illustrator, that the deadline is a beautiful thing, because you don't have to wonder, well, what am I going to do, or what am I going to paint? You know what you have to do, and you know when you have to get it done by, and that's a fantastic anchor to hold on to when things are, a little bit askew. And so I would, for this book, for instance, the Pursuit of Happiness, I would travel for about a week, collect information, come back, or 2 weeks, come back, sketch and write and paint in about 10 days. So it's a lot of production, but I'm not painting in the Sistine Chapel, and I'm not painting in oil, for instance. I'm painting in gouache. It dries quickly. And then, you learn how to do it. As Jefferson, I follow Jefferson's dictum. What do you think? We think we've had enough talking? Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll go over and look at those two objects, if you can do it. I'll mention the keys and the perforator. Can I mention those? Sure. Okay. Thank you. We conclude with a book signing. I am pushing this timing a little bit because on the tour this morning, Myra saw a couple of objects over in the ceremonial office of the Librarian of Congress that we're going back to photograph. One are the keys to get in the grand doors of the Jefferson building, and the second one is especially interesting. It's the perforator that punched LC on page 99 of all of the books before the electronic age. It was our old security system. So she's going to take another look at those, and perhaps they'll end up in another one of her paintings. Let's conclude with another thank you for Myra Kalman.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.